Good evening, everyone, and of course, happy International Women's Day. I'm Georgia Yexley. I'm Head of Growth and Chair of Women at Beryl. First, I just want to say a huge thank you to Landor Links, our event partners for this series. All of your support throughout has been much appreciated. We have 4 more events on this week, so if you haven't checked them out yet, we will drop the blog link into the chat so that everyone can access the registrations for the other events. Each panel will have a group of expert women in tech, mobility and business, and each will deal with topics that intersect with these sectors, gender issues and this year's theme of Choose to Challenge. All are free, so do sign up and hear from some phenomenal women in our sector. So second, of course, a huge thanks to the Women at Beryl Network who are hosting this event. We all have very busy day jobs, so making the time to raise each other up and launch a series of this caliber is really no small feat. So huge thanks to the network as well. And of course to our panelists who are joining us today, who will be introducing themselves shortly. So today our focus is on women leading in mobility. We have a fantastic panel of founders, C-suite leaders and innovators in the public, private and third sector. So without much further ado, first I'd like to welcome up Emily Brooke, founder and NEC of Beryl.
Hi there. So quick intro, Georgia, is that what you want us to do?
Yes, please.
So hi, I'm Emily. I'm founder of Beryl. Beryl began as my university project with a safety innovation called the Laser Light, which was integrated into all of the Santander cycles in London. Beryl today is arguably the UK's leading micromobility company. We operate our own bike share schemes, bikes, e-bikes, and also now e-scooters. And we sell our technology to transport operators such as Transport for London, Transport for West Midlands. But Beryl is also now 70, 80 people now, Georgia. It's allowed me to take a step back, and I'm in a non-executive chair role at Beryl. And I have another role. I'm partner and helping build an early stage impact fund, investing in startups across Europe, having a meaningful impact on society and the longevity of the planet. Cool.
Thanks so. Cheers. And second, we have another Emily. So we have Emily Cherry, who is joining us today, Chief Exec of the Bikeability Trust. Hi, Emily.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I was reflecting, so I'm Chief Exec of the Bikeability Trust, and I was reflecting about the Choose to Challenge. I think the whole year has been a kind of a challenge for us really over the pandemic, but at the Bikeability Trust, so we train children in cycle training and cycle skills for life. We've trained 3.5 million children in the schools network since 2017, and our ambition is to get to another 5 million more in the next 5 years. My background is in child protection, working for the big children's charities, and I'm also a trustee of a mental health charity, My Black Dog, and involved in the International Day of Peace. So I do have a number of hats, like most of these brilliant women who are on the panel tonight. Pleasure to join.
Just a few hats from you there, Emily. Thank you so much. So we also have Caroline Seaton, who is Head of Growth and Strategy and co-founder at Human Forest.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Caroline, co-founder of Human Forest. I founded Human Forest just over 18 months ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we provide dockless sustainable bikes across central London, and they're free for 10 minutes every day. And our pricing model is different in that we've created a digital marketing platform on the app, which enables us to subsidise the cost of rides for our users. To date, we've partnered with the Financial Times and Whole Foods, and we're launching London-wide in late May. But just very quickly, I just want to say, how pleased I am to be here today, and thank you so much for organising, Georgia. I think International Women's Day this year is really important. Women have really borne the brunt of the pandemic, and this recovery is going to be one of the biggest challenges we face. So it's great to get the discussion going.
Very much. Thank you, Caroline. And as in the same vein, I'm sure we're going to explain many, many more hats that she wears than how I'm going to introduce her. But we also have Jenny Joadowski, the founder of London Bike Kitchen.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm Jenny Joadowski, the director at LBK. We focused on bicycle education for the masses and did a lot of classes, drop-in sessions. We ran a women and gender variant night that all of it had to stop because of the pandemic, but I've taken to teaching bike maintenance classes online. I'm also one half of the Wheel Suckers podcast. I've also written a book, How to Build a Bike, and am now the today announcement chair of the Women of Color Cycling Collective. So we got set up in 2018. I set it up with Jules Walker, and we were the Women of Color Cycling Group London. So we were just very small, meeting up at Look Mum No Hands. And the pandemic, one of the good things that came out of it is we took our work online, and we reach a lot more people now, and we've decided to become an official charity, and we're here to provide a sense of belonging and community for women of color who ride bicycles or who want to ride bicycles. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Got me out on a 11K ride today between panels, so thanks for that. So we also have Christina Gibson, who's head of product and growth at DOT.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Gibson, and I'm passionate about designing products that improve people's lives. In my current role, I lead teams to shape the future of transit in our cities with DOT. And my background is really in product-led growth. I spent over 10 years in the Silicon Valley, and most notably for this group, I was an early team member at Lyft, where I led their growth into new verticals and new cities, but also into new modes, where we pioneered the innovation for what became the bike and scooter strategy on that ride-sharing platform. I'm excited to be here today and looking forward to the discussion with everyone.
Thanks so much, Christina. Thanks for being here. And of course, last but not least, we have CPO of product at TIER, Georgina Smallwood.
Hi, Georgia. Thanks for having me. As Georgia said, I'm the CPO at TIER Mobility. We are a micromobility platform that operates in 85 countries across Europe and the Middle East. I look after product there. And in my past, I've been in another massively male-dominated industry as a CPO of a banking platform called N26. I also recently founded a female founders network called Auxilia, and we're really there to make sure that the diversity that the funding goes to is there. What I found out last week was that 85% of funding in Europe last year went to all male founding teams, and I think the only way that we can really change that statistic is to make sure that where we can, we lift other women up and we promote them, and we put them up into positions where they have access to funding and they have access to ideas and support and advice. And I'm really, really excited to be here and talking with these incredible women today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thanks, Georgie. So as you can all see, an absolutely phenomenal panel and such a breadth of experience from the women in this room. I'll keep in the tradition, I would say, of the panel debate and open our discussion up today with a quote. So I'd like to quote Shirley Chisholm. This is one of my favourite quotes that I've been hearing today, that I think is really in keeping with the Choose to Challenge theme of this year. So her quote is, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." And that really resonated with me and the group of women we have here today. But I actually think it's fair to say that for each of you, your stories are probably more in keeping with setting up your own table. And I think that's what we're doing with the series here today. And, you know, on that note, this is set up through the Women at Beryl network. Georgie, you've mentioned Auxilia there. We've talked about the Women of Colour Cycling Collective. Networks clearly play a really important role in reaching positions of leadership. So let's start there. Personal and formal, how have they played a role in your journey to leadership? And actually, Jenny, would you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. I've got my notes here. I'm scribbling down. That quote, by the way, is like perfect. I love it, because I feel like that's been my journey. It's just been like making it up as I go along, making my own table, like you said. With networks, though, I think they're the invisible glue that hold us all together, whether it's like family, friends, hobbies, work. And it's important to recognize those networks. And I think those networks depend on each other as well. They're all interlinked in different ways. No one person does anything on their own ever. Like, you have all these connections. Pick yourself up by your own bootstraps philosophy. I'm like, that's nice, but it's not going to get the job done. I personally don't like it. We've got these invisible structures in society of like racism, classism, sexism. Those are interwoven into our networks as well. And I feel like when we have visible networks that we've created, then we can actually challenge those structures. Like, we fight them, we can tear them down, we build them back up again. But recognizing that you are part of a network is the first step. And I think a lot of people feel alone, like they are not able to make any sort of change in their lives. But when you find out that you have connections with people like you or thinking like you, then you feel like, oh, I can actually make a difference here, or I can create something completely new. So like, when I first started out, I was not a mechanic. I had no clue how to run a business. I was a marketing assistant at a small environmental charity. I just had this idea to start a DIY bike workshop. I was like, there's got to be other people that are really curious about this. And I just cast a wide net. I just asked so many people. I talked to anyone who would listen to me. And then that network started to form. And it's always there. You just have to look for it. And when you make those connections, it is like a neuron, like building, like a synapse. Like, you get that charge of like, I've made a connection, we're going to do something, and it gives you so much energy. So for me, a network is making those connections. I'm constantly energized by those connections. I'm like really excited to meet everyone here, because you're a new network for me. Like, this is much more cerebral, fancy. Like, I'm usually working like I'm greasy, I'm dirty. My network is people who, you know, they're the people I teach. They are women in STEM. Like, that's another network, you know. And I just feel so much energy when I make connections and make those links, because everything is connected. And that's how I view networks in general. That's always been my like personal and professional journey.
Definitely, I think pointing out actually how mixed, even though we do have a strong representation kind of micromobility, but then you'll see even in the panel that's here today and throughout the rest of the panels through this week, how varied the backgrounds, experience, and what our day-to-day looks like, but still making sense to kind of come together as a network across this series of how much possibility there is in the kind of mobility tech space to actually meet people doing things really different from you and take inspiration from that. And I think on that note, actually, that's a really nice lead into the work that you're doing, Georgie, in building Auxilia and actually building a platform that's going to help women, female founders, to access, you know, information and potentially new hires and early stage teams. Could you tell us a little bit more about this new venture for you?
Yeah, sure. I think also to Jenny's point, networks. I think women in general, like, we build friendships, right? We build relationships. That's what we're good at. And I personally have always struggled with the concept of networking, because the networks that are structured for us can be super defining. I found, like, there was always the professional women's network or the fintech network or the mothers group. And I just didn't identify as any one of these things, which, to be honest, like, also made me feel really lonely, because I was like, well, I don't completely belong here. Like, I'm a professional, I'm in product, I'm in fintech, I am also a mum. Like, there's so much of me that is missing from this particular network. And you know, I wanted to talk with people about topics, about things that I was interested in. And that's actually why Auxilia came about, because I spent 15 years as a female in technology, and all those frustrations, all those things that I felt were unfair, it all just kind of built up. And it really exploded a couple of weeks ago when I read that stat about the distribution of funding, because it's not just about equality, it's also about our future. And if we have such a small representation of society, having their ideas funded for the future, then what is our future going to look like? You know, there's a reason why we don't have like great ideas for healthcare and great ideas for education, and you know, and women have a really strong part to play there, but we need to shine a spotlight on it. And I just asked so many people, how can this happen? How can in 2020 that actually be a statistic? 89% of VC funding. It's insane. And lots of people had lots of answers for me, and in the end, my outcome of these conversations was it's their network, right? Their network is completely homogeneous. And I get guys, because I am a self-starter, which means that I look around in my network and I find people that have got great ideas and I can fund them as a pre-seed. And when Estelle asked me if I would do this, I said I will, as long as I can define my own investment thesis. And they said, oh, okay, what do you want to do? FinTech? I was like, no, not really. What I want to do is only invest in female founders or co-founders. And so when I get pitch decks sent to me and I ask, you know, oh, that's awesome, I love your idea, do you have a female co-founder? I swear to God, 100% of the time, the answer is, oh, look, I've really been looking for one. I would love a female co-founder. There's just none out there. And like, what? Like, give me a week, right? Do you want a tech one, a product one, a business one, a marketing one? I got them all. Tell me what you want. But this is the problem, right? Their network is the problem, right? And really, we have two options here. One is we can break into that network and make sure that we're part of it and we're benefiting from it, which, let's face it, women have been trying to do for decades. And the other one is that we build one that's just as powerful. And I think it was Carolyn who said, like, at the moment, you know, this is a really important International Women's Day, because we have women in power. We see women in political positions. We see women at the top of companies. I mean, there's a female leading Citibank now, as of 8 days ago. You know, we are in a situation where we can see more role models, but it's not just enough. We need to accelerate it. And so when I started Auxilia, I was like, all right, how am I going to do this? Classic product person. What's the MVP? I'll make a LinkedIn group. And I thought maybe I'll get 20 or 30 people. I want a place where I've got some friends who can advise. I know some other people who are investors. I know heaps of people who've got ideas or who are looking for funding. Let's just put them together. I had 150 people in 15 hours. And it completely exploded. This morning I hit 450 people 7 days after it started, and that just tells me that the time is now and people are just looking for some help, right? They just need someone to make that initial connection for them, then they'll take it from there. And so that's how we started the group.
Fantastic. And I'm sure we have some people joining the call tonight who potentially have, you know, a new idea or are looking into this right now and thinking about starting this journey. So certainly do check out that group. There's lots of really interesting stuff on there I can certainly vouch for. And actually, I think it's a good time to kind of start talking about this idea of fundraising and launching new products. You know, we have founders here. Caroline, I wonder if there's something that you can kind of weigh in on, having kind of recently gone through a fundraising round as a female co-founder, how you found that, and whether there are some routes that are more accessible, or is it really about kind of working through our relationships more so than tapping into networks that weren't built for us?
Yeah, I mean, I just really, everything obviously that Georgie said has just completely resonated. I can feel the kind of like fire in my belly starting to rage. It does infuriate me. And I think, you know, that the stat actually that 1% of funding goes to all female leads, you know, it just even puts us into like starker reality. But I think the other thing we just need to think about a little bit is that actually, and the stat probably varies, but probably between like 5 and 10% of the pitch decks that a lot of VCs are receiving are from all female funding teams. So it's not just that they're not getting the funding, but they're also not having the support to get to that point to put the pitch deck forward. So I think, you know, the network that you have have founded will be so valuable for that, because it's really targeting the entire entrepreneurial cycle, right from founding the business through to funding, and getting all the support that they need. And what we really found we've done 2 fundraisers recent in the last year. The first was very much looking at people in the mobility space with our seed round who understood our proposition, and that was very much drawing on our networks, particularly my co-founder Augustine, who obviously is male and has got a lot of experience, over 10 years experience in mobility. So for him, he was kind of really he led on that, supported by myself, but he was tapping on it on a lot of people who already knew him and had seen his work in the space. And then we did a crowdfunding round, and that went very well. 550 investors, but again, making sure that I was out there, as well as Augustine and Mike, my co-founders. So we haven't yet sort of faced the issue of funding. I keep saying to the guys, I'm going to hold you back, and they are incredibly supportive, and working out how we can do this together, and putting our best foot forward. But the advice that I kind of give is to really look at some of those VCs that have mandated requirements around female representation. There's a couple like BBG Ventures, Forerunner Ventures. There are, you've got to hunt them out, but they are out there. So looking at where you can find a bit of a niche, and speaking to them. And then I guess the other bigger picture to this answer too is about we need people that on the other side of the table that reflect what we're looking for. So many venture capitalists, and the profile of venture capitalists seems to mirror the profile of the people that are getting the funding. So we really need to how do we advocate to get more female VCs who understand our viewpoint. But I do think mobility is a space that perhaps we can really crack this and reduce the gender gap, because surely mobility is an industry that we all need to be represented. 50% of the population are female, we all use transport, so how can we just make sure that our viewpoints are really cutting through, and getting the funding that these part female teams deserve.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think you're touching on some really kind of interesting points here as well around, do we mandate requirements? Is that going to have the right impact? Where does the responsibility lie? We started the conversation talking about kind of building our networks and relationships to be able to access. But Emily, actually, this is a really great part for you to kind of weigh on, having just set up Revent with 50-50 female to male co-founders. Where do VCs play a role in this? Where does the responsibility of the VC come in?
I was just thinking as Caroline was talking, with Beryl, we raise money from many different sources. We do angel investors in the first instance, and then crowdfunding, and then institutional, some index, more angels at the Branson family, all sorts of different. And I can't think of how many pitches I've done over the years, but I couldn't remember a single one that was to a female. I can't remember ever sitting across the table to another female VC. I think, I had a particularly thick skin. I went to a boarding school I was in a boys' boarding house. So I'm very young to kind of stand on my own 2 feet and to kind of like not think twice about kind of speaking my mind in front of guys. But that's not comfortable. That's not usual to kind of, especially in the kind of context of going and asking for something from a typically an older male. Like it's not a comfortable position to naturally be in. So if there are any kind of young women out there who find themselves in a fundraising position and want to have a chat, then reach out. More than happy to. And in terms of Revent, yeah, we've got 50% female partners, which is fantastic. And I think it sort of does need to come from mandating it in some instances. And again, looking back and thinking back at Beryl, we incorporated as a B Corp or qualified as a B Corp, and some of that, through that process, it makes you kind of really analyze everything about your business and how you operate and what you do and who your suppliers are, what your practices are across everything that you do, and things that has kind of milestones for best practice, and often it is kind of gender diversity at all levels of the business, and with your supply chain and with your investors and with your board and all this kind of stuff. And it really does make you step back, but sort of like you could have needed that, the kind of mandate to kind of, not necessarily the mandate, but to make you kind of push yourself and think about it. So I think we the fund, we definitely would prioritize mixed gender teams, and I think it's a challenge that we hold to ourselves too, and it kind of needs to be there, open, like stated sadly in the first place.
Maybe that's sort of a natural evolution as well of those, the targets for 30% of women on boards, and perhaps it needs to go a little bit further to the way that funding's allocated, and it reflects within, the way that companies report. We've got the gender pay gap, but should the VCs need to report on the percentage of companies that they invest in with women on the board, and how those stats really play out to get some transparency around it.
Yeah, because the stats on performance from companies with female founders is incredible. I mean, it's obviously.
Well, this is it, right? Like, it's not just an equality thing, right? It's a commercial thing. It makes commercial sense. This is the bit that is.
The population is female. Like, why are you not? Yeah.
I mean, this is such a vital topic, and what you said there about the fact that it's actually kind of commercially impacts your business to have female boards members. I mean, there's so much evidence out there on this. It's something that we've spoken about in a panel earlier today as well, that I have to double check the stat to make sure I'm not giving out false information, but here it is. So there was a study done by Catalyst that showed businesses with women board directors outperformed those that didn't by 53%. So it just shows you, that's the bottom line there. True gender diversity, which means penetrating the board level, has financial benefit on your business. And then alongside that, which I think is a very important pairing, is that companies that are in the top quartile for ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have greater returns than their industry median. So put those two things together, and I think you've got a clear choice, a clear pathway to improving business success. So this is something that we absolutely need to talk about, and I think that, again, it leads really nicely. We've talked about our networks, building relationships, access to funding, but also, we need to think about what are the pathways to entering this industry from every level. Not everybody is going to be coming through at the founder level with a great idea and looking for, millions of pounds of funding. Actually, there are going to be lots of people who are just stepping into their career and thinking, is this approachable for me? I think mobility in particular, and the types of roles that we're in and the businesses that we're in, it's often thought of as a kind of operations-led or tech-led business, which traditionally the pathways just aren't there in the same way for women. Christina, you talked about being part of that early stage journey time and time again. How have you found that kind of navigating a very male dominated industry and being at that kind of lead and working to that kind of leadership position?
Yeah, I think traditionally mobility and tech and ops, and especially hardware, are very male dominated. I think I've been lucky based on my kind of personal nature that I kind of embraced this fire or this challenge that we're all talking about, and push for what I was looking for. But I also was very lucky. We talked earlier about whether it's relationships or networks. I had some early mentors in my career who were in tech engineering roles, so I saw representation early. So I think one thing that I try to do now that I am kind of at the table is try to foster and really challenge how we can have a very inclusive workplace. Because I think if within our own companies, if we're being inclusive and promoting women, that also starts to recruit talent. And the more that you have women in roles, women graduating from university will see, oh, here's like a hardware engineer, like I can do that because another woman has done it. So I think always advocating when you are able to have that seat at the table. I also think one thing that I did at another company at Lyft was kind of embracing this idea that there's no action that's too small. I remember having a coffee with someone who was in our HR team, and she was saying, oh, I really wish I could learn more about product, like I don't know how to get into it. And pretty much that brainstormed into, why don't we have a mentorship program? And similarly, product MVP, what do we need? We just needed a Google Doc, like a sign up form. And that actually became something that the HR team then used internally as a mentorship and networking inside the company. So I think even if it seems like a small action, it could have a very big impact one on that individual, but certainly in terms of the broader representation. And then in terms of giving back, I think as we think about women who are maybe picking what they want to study, it's also encouraging kind of the future women leaders to pursue things like STEM and see that there are pathways. Because I also very much agree and resonate with those stats. I think women are such huge assets to startups, but we need to be showing that there is a seat at the table and that this is a pathway, by kind of creating that representation with the small actions we can do today.
You've got to see it to be it, is what they say, isn't it? You have to see it to be it. And I think, yeah, touching again on the kind of mentorship role, and when you're in a position of privilege and you have a seat at the table, to make sure that you're actually paying that forward and bringing more women up with you, is something that I think a lot of the conversations that we've been having in preparation for this series are touching on that point, and how valuable that is from a personal standpoint. I was asked recently about my mentors, and I realized that actually all of what I would now consider to be mentors were my peers, people that I was working alongside, who just gave you enough encouragement and support to continue to kind of build and learn and grow. So it's not always coming from the top down, but also from the people that are sat alongside you. So kind of accessing that level of support, I think, is vital. And Emily, I think, in your introduction,
sorry, just before,
go ahead,
Georgia, before you go, because I think what Christina said about representation is super, super important. But I think also sometimes, like, we as females, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot, right? And we often talk about it as, when you don't think that you can, because when you're coming up. But I also want to say, like, often people in positions of power also have that imposter syndrome, and I know I struggled with this, because, like, who am I to go out there and kind of rally the troops? And I think that, like, we also need to, like, the women that are in positions of power need to also recognize and own that. And I still struggle going onto these podcasts and talking about myself, because I'm like, oh my God, like, but we need to get over this, because otherwise no one is going to see themselves ever. And so, like, push people to tell their story, like your peers, the people that you work with, the people who work in your teams, like, tell them to go out there, because the more we see these women in positions talking about really cool things like AI and hardware, and the more people will do it. Because you're right, Georgia, you can't be what you can't see. And it sounds like a really cool tagline, but it's just reality. And you can see it in the statistics in countries like the Nordics, and the countries that have women in political positions like New Zealand, like the Nordics, have a higher representation of female founders, of female executive teams, of females on boards, just because it's a massive flow-on effect. So we also need to get over a bit of our, like, shrinking violet syndrome at the top and kind of own it as well.
It's interesting, the places you've mentioned, I'm pretty sure they also have higher GDPR and happiness rates, and it's very strange. There seems to be a correlation there.
Really surprising.
Not pretty well, coronavirus, you just have to mention these things. But no, I saw actually posted a really interesting article in the Auxilia chat the other day around this idea of imposter syndrome, and that we actually need to start calling it what it is. Women don't have imposter syndrome. They're up against situations that make us feel that it's wrong to talk about our achievements. It's not bragging if it's facts. So when you're speaking facts about the things that you're doing and you're shouting out achievements, it's not bragging. Don't feel bad about it. Don't be embarrassed about it. What you're saying is facts, and we have to support each other in doing that, and just more of this, really. And actually, that's something that is embedded really early on, right? So we're talking about school age. We're taught to act in a certain way or behave in a certain way, or that, girls do this and boys do that. Emily, this is an area that I know you're very passionate about, is that early stage. How can we support young women and girls to feel that these pathways are accessible to them, and that they don't need to feel imposter syndrome at any point?
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think, I mean, obviously at Bikeability, we are working day in, day out with children, and at a delivery level, we're delivering at a universal level, and our gender statistics are fantastic. So we are in there day in, wanting to motivate and inspire girls to see that cycling is an active choice and an active choice for them, and it's something they can absolutely can. It's a bit like the This Girl Can campaign, right? In terms of kind of sport, this is absolutely something for you. But what we need to do much more of is then take that love and that instilling of that joy of cycling in a childhood level into then how do you turn that into a career? How do we create that right pathway so that more girls are coming through, so that they are the future bikeability instructors, they're the future founders, they're the future network. I mean, we have a phenomenal network that sits underneath the trust of training providers who are essentially micro small businesses, who are then delivering through the instructor network in all the schools in their locality. But yeah, we need to get alongside them and to help them grow that network more effectively, give them the business skills, support them to be able to make the best quality bids, to get more grant funding in, to be able to grow their network, to be able to recruit more. And that's why at the Trust we'll be launching in the next financial year both an instructor bursary, so training for new instructors that will be linked to equality, diversity and inclusion targets, so that we can really tackle some of the images and the issues within the workforce itself. But we're also launching a brand new business industry role. So plug for any of you looking for a new job out there, please. It's in The Guardian right now, to get alongside and take on that business angel role, because I've got some fantastic female entrepreneurs in our training provider network, but we need more. You know, we need more to get alongside us to grow the business. And I think we've got a real responsibility and a role to be able to do that. And you know, coming from a child protection background, I'm never going to miss the opportunity to say it. You know, girls particularly are much more likely to not just feel that imposter syndrome, but from a self-esteem and a self-confidence perspective. If we go in telling them from the early outset they can't do something, that stays with them much more from a child psychology perspective than it does through men. And just the final other thing that I'd say is on my own leadership journey, and what I've certainly definitely felt I've learned much more in this last pandemic is, as a female leader, I want to lead through empathy and kindness. I'd rather be a Jacinda Ardern than other male leaders with floppy hair that we won't mention in this space, because that is the way to lead, inspire and to bring a generation with you. Is, you know, now is the time to get alongside, to be kind, to be empathetic and bring people up in this space, not bring them down.
Wow, I mean, I just want to applaud what you've just said there. Absolutely. I mean, I think you've wrapped things up really nicely as well, and some of the themes that we started to bring out in this conversation. You've talked about actually taking on a quota, taking on, we are going to improve the gender parity. I know that you have targets around much broader diversity targets in the instructors that you're trying to capture with that bursary. Actually, even one of the lovely things, and I think an example of why it's so vital having conversations like this and building networks like this, was the link that was made in sharing the information about that bursary and with the Women of Colour Cycling Collective, which is a huge group of women that have the skills and interests that are going to be so well placed to access that. Just by making that link, there's an ability to actually bring in a much greater group of people into accessing that resource, so and potentially opening up their role in the cycling world. I think a lot of the conversations we're having today center around this, right? It's what do we do next to make sure that we are improving gender parity? Each of you have spoken about this from various points. While we encourage the attendees to start bringing in and sharing some of your questions to the panel as well in the questions box, please, what I would really like to do is welcome each of our panelists to maybe share, again, connecting with that theme of choose to challenge. What is next? What is the thing that we need to concentrate on as we go through the rest of the year to make sure that we are going to see more female leaders in mobility and that we're going to see them succeed? So I might pick on someone, unless anybody else
first.
your hand went.
Can I go?
Please
okay.
do, yeah.
I wanted to speak to what Emily and Christina both brought up just now in terms of like the question of how do we get more gender parity. is questioning the, you know, I want to sit at the table, but what if the table's the wrong structure, right? Like it's this top-down hierarchical structure. Oh, you can only have one number one. And it's like, but if we're going to lead through empathy and kindness, like that structure is probably wrong. Like we want possibly more flat structures, where people feel like they're going to be listened to and heard, and their voices are going to be taken into consideration. And I just want to throw that out there in terms of questioning the structures that we currently have and seeing if we can create something different, something better to encourage better gender parity, basically.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's an interesting opportunity there then, isn't there, in startups. I think startups tend to have a very flat structure and need people to kind of run and do things fast and make mistakes, and maybe give a little bit of opportunity to women in that sense, to be able to try things out and get things wrong and have more opportunity in that way. Christina, I see you nodding vehemently there, having had quite a lot of startup experience. Would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with the challenge of, should we take the current kind of corporate structures and find maybe a different approach? I think one thing that I always try to do is, as Georgie was saying, startups offer this opportunity to wear all the, you know, the proverbial like many hats. And how can each of us be looking around in our own organizations to find maybe a woman who's not raising her hand because she doesn't realize that she should raise her hand, but you think might be well suited for that, and offer this opportunity to stretch that individual. I think another thing I try to focus on with my teams is also, what can we control? So I try to run my team very much where clear decision making, you know, kind of power, if you will. That way it's not, oh, I need someone to approve this. It's like, no, you understand the problem or the product that you're working on, and I have confidence and trust in this individual to kind of work across the organization and take the right decision. So I think empathy and kindness also starts with the individual. So encouraging that within our teams, and then also creating the space for people, whether they're on our teams or in our company or in our networks that we're building, to feel like they could reach out and have a difficult conversation of, I feel like I'm getting passed over for this, or I don't know how to approach this decision maker. Because these types of conversations, especially with gender and diversity, in some ways they can feel uncomfortable, but the uncomfortable conversations are the opportunities for change to lead in a bit more. So I completely like the idea of, like, let's take the corporate structure and change it, but I think maybe we can start small with some of the things that we're doing currently. And for startups, I think it's a great idea. Like, if you only have 2 founders, how can you centralize the decision making there?
And that's really, really vital, I think. I'm going to start peppering in some of the questions from the audience as well, because that's such a nice lead on to one of the questions we have. I think what you're talking about is advocacy and allyship as well, to the women in your workplace. And one of the questions that we've had from the audience is also, what's the most important thing that you want men to start doing as a matter of urgency? And I think it's such an interesting and vital part of the conversation. We always come to this part of the conversation where it's, how do we involve men and what do men need to do? So does anyone feel particularly strongly about what we want? Caroline?
And I think, just from, say, purely from a recruitment perspective, I think it should be compulsory within companies to have a short list of candidates that includes 50% women, or at least 40% women, where people are actively going out to find candidates to come onto that short list. Because, you know, perhaps women aren't putting themselves forward for these jobs, or they're not naturally falling into their consideration set. So it's about taking it upon, you know, the companies taking on themselves to really seek out some of those candidates, you know, shake some of their networks to see who may come forward and who might have the skills to fulfill that job.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It even comes down to how you write job descriptions, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes some job descriptions, they just read like, we are looking for a man for this job. So sometimes, even if you just take the chance to ask somebody else to have a look over it and see whether there's any kind of terminology that's gendered that you can take out of it, taking the time to do that can actually mean you're going to get a lot more candidates and potentially the right person for the role, right?
I think also, Georgia, I think from the question is, what can men do? And I think some of the trouble sometimes is bias is innate, right? It's not a conscious thing. It's unconscious bias for a reason. And there are so many men out there who are willing to support in any way possible, but also sometimes they don't know how to do that, or the things that they do are very well intentioned but actually really don't help. And so what would be great, and I have so many men who've reached out to help with Auxilia in the last week, and they're like, oh, can I join the group? And I'm like, no, you can't join the group. The group is for women. It's a women's network so that we can, because we also need to learn, right? So it kind of goes two ways. Like, we need to learn how to naturally just support each other. How to, spot each other when we're struggling or when something is going wrong, and reach a hand out and lift that person up a bit. What men can do is ask us how they can help. So whether we can connect them with someone who they can advise on something, or whether we can say, hey, why don't you make sure that your team is more diverse, and why don't you hire those roles? And often I come across, we're all in business, right? Like, some of us are in not-for-profit, which is amazing, but in the end, for the companies that I work with, we're a commercial organization. We need to make money. And so often I'm put in a position where we're trying to hire a female for a role. Like, we want to have more diverse teams, we want more diversity in leadership, and we just cannot find a candidate for that. Now, obviously, I'm going to ask a few times, so we make sure that we have done all the things that we can do to find the right candidate, but sometimes you need the role filled. But the point is, don't stop then. Then you need to work out what you need to do to make sure that the next time that role comes up, it's filled by a woman. Right? Because that's the bit that's hard. We might not have like the numbers at the top at the moment. I think the numbers are higher than most people think they are, of women that are ready to take on those roles. But we also need to help people from middle management and up, because what we see is so much female talent leaving after maternity leave, right? Because we don't have pathways back into organizations for women to figure out how they're going to handle this new life that they have. I mean, if you want to see someone who's shaking with lack of confidence, it's the person that's given the baby and said, okay, you can go home from the hospital now, I'll see you later. Like that is someone who is super smart, is super intellectual, knows what they're talking about, has all the confidence in the world. They just need a pathway back in, and those pathways aren't there. So we need to make sure that we're creating those pathways. It might not be for a role today, but it has to be for the next one.
And I think you are going down a really important road here, actually. That another question is pulling us along, that's come from the audience, and that is what sets apart companies, big or small, that really makes the meaningful change when it comes to addressing gender inequality. So not stopping at not hiring into that role, I think, is certainly one. But are there other ways that companies of various sizes or setups, maybe not just kind of commercially driven companies, can make meaningful change on this?
I think that the pandemic has really, we've got to start completely thinking about working practices and the way that we run offices and the way that we run organizations. I mean, who could have imagined 3-4 years ago as a leader you would have said, no, it's completely okay to come on a work meeting with your children in tow because you need to look after them. You need to be able to take time. We've got to come out of this to say, actually, now is the time to completely refocus so that we can, there isn't a no longer work or family. It's absolutely, we work around our family responsibilities, and we help women to kind of grow because in their parenting and their caring responsibilities, and bring that into the workplace and change the way that we think about the way the world of work operates. And, you know, I'm a mum, my 10-year-old and 12-year-old have been noisy in the background, so apologies, but we're all used to that right now. What I have valued most about this period is I've stopped commuting. I'm not spending 5 hours a day on a train anymore, getting into an arbitrary office. So now I can spend 5 hours a day with my family and catching up on work and not having to split myself in two anymore. And I think we've got to continue to challenge our way in the way that we deliver our companies so that it's a much more inclusive working environment.
I think that's a really good point. I think there's an opportunity. This COVID, it's so easy to kind of focus on the negatives, but there are so many opportunities that's thrown up as well. And mobility, you know, these empty roads and people on bikes for the first time, there's lots of things to talk about and the positivity of that, but the working environment as well. I mean, my founding partner of Revent, she had a baby within weeks of starting the fund, and she's also got a 3-year-old. And if it was normal times, I mean, she'd be on traveling for fundraising, traveling to meet companies, she'd be away from the kids the whole time, but she's constantly got a Zoom call with Theo in one arm and Jack in the other, and it's amazing. Like it's yeah, how do we continue that in new working ways and encouraging people's family lives to be part of it?
So we are making progress, I think. Yeah, sorry, Caroline, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, as we come out of this, the thing we do need to sort of keep an eye on too is that, you know, 140,000 more women have been furloughed than men over this period. So really, you know, making sure that, you know, those roles are still available for women when they get back, and if they are, you know, let go. How do we look at some of that talent and bringing that into, you know, the mobility space? I think there is going to be a real opportunity for people to you know, meet some wonderful women who could join their teams.
Really, really vital point. And actually, Caroline, I think what we're going to start talking about is an area that when we were kind of preparing for this discussion that you raised as well, in some of the ways that we have been progressing in mobility and access for our customers, our end users, our riders, the people who use our services, getting better in terms of gender parity. I think a lot of us have seen that improve over the last few months. And I do just want to share, someone from the audience has actually shared their story rather than a question. I think this is a good reference to kind of opening up that conversation of how things might have also improved, but what we still have left to do. So an audience member shared that as a female solicitor in the 70s, 80s, she was reprimanded with a formal warning of unbecoming behaviour. Her crime was cycling to work, and the argument was, as you were as good as the car that you drove, which I think is still, unfortunately, some people still believe that. And what would clients think if they saw me arriving at work on a bicycle? I was often ridiculed and wasn't promoted. But 2 decades later, I retrained as a cycling instructor. Fantastic. And then in my 50s was asked to write an article in the Women's Solicitors magazine on being a cycling solicitor. So that's absolutely fantastic to hear. But she does note that her daughter, 40 years her junior, is still experiencing the prejudice in a male-dominated world, and she is an Army officer helicopter pilot. So this is certainly not, I mean, wow, phenomenal story, first of all, and thank you, audience member, for sharing that with us. It goes a long way to showing how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go. Caroline, I mentioned some things that you raised in this, because one of the things that we had started to discuss that potentially has made an impact on accessing cycling services and becoming cyclists is changes in infrastructure, changes in the way that we get to work or how we work, that have been fast-tracked because of this pandemic. Now, it's also, you've made a very good point around how many women have been negatively impacted, and I certainly don't want to get into weird ground of saying that the pandemic has been a positive in some messed up way, but in terms of the infrastructure changes and access to cycling, what have we seen change, and what opportunity is there to build on that as we go forward?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, and just even in the area that we were operating, you know, increased cycle lanes is really makes women feel safe while they're cycling. They're more likely, you know, to jump on a bike. I know me personally, if there's a demarcation of the cycle lane and I'm not kind of right up against the traffic, then I'm much more likely to jump on a bike. And you know, a bit of the work that's been done, particularly in the Netherlands, like mothers groups started advocating for safer cycleways so they could take their children on the bikes, and that really ended up having a huge impact. And the representation of women on bikes in some of those Nordic countries is more like 50%, 55%, whereas I think in London it's sort of around 27%. So there's a huge way to go, but it seems like, you know, this fast tracking of infrastructure has really helped and will create a more, you know, cycle friendly environment for women. I know Emily's done a little bit of work on this as well too, so keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Emily B or Emily C, we both looked at each other then. Right?
You both have worked on this though.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're at the Trust, we are absolutely fixed. I mean, when we speak to parents on a day-to-day basis, it's lack of safe cycling routes. It really holds them back from both being a role model cyclist, which many women and many mums absolutely are, but also stops them from allowing their children to cycle on their own and gain that kind of skills and confidence and independence. Cycling infrastructure works best when you can also pair it with cycle training to help people really have the confidence to use it. And that's where we've got to put more money and more support into supporting, and particularly women's groups, and particularly, you know, we've got some fantastic groups that work with BAME Muslim young women's groups to, you know, address some of the cultural issues and the support and the real lack of inclusion that they have in their culture to be able to get out. And these are the things that are just not funded. I mean, Jenny will know it very well. It's very difficult to get that funded, and that's something that we definitely want to do more support and to be shouting more about, because it works well when you've got quality infrastructure and quality training to give people confidence.
We certainly need to be bringing that question and acknowledgement of kind of intersectionality and how that affects women's experiences at every level as well. We do have another panel on that this week, so just shout out for that panel to join as well. And I just want to mirror, and I think we've all been talking this direction, mirror one of our audience members, or to echo one of our audience members who said this is not about returning back to normal. You know, women have been set back dramatically through this pandemic. We've heard some of the stats that are pretty shocking there. So it's about, you know, continuing to build, continuing to fund, and actually take that trajectory. I was talking this morning about a roundtable I was on that was around like combined travel, and it was the women in the room who were able to say that safety, and the question of safety and my decision in whether I choose to cycle or not, my question of safety isn't just about whether I wear a helmet or not. It's about personal safety, which part of the city I'm in, how dark it is, whether I'm on my own. And it was the women in the room who were able to bring that into the conversation. So I think we definitely need to make sure we have that representation at every level. And on that note, we have had a member of the audience. I think we've really focused on our ability to influence and where we can influence. And we've had a member of the audience ask, here it is. So she is, here we are, a junior member of staff and the only woman on a team of 12. So could our panelists please share ideas on how she can support her team and her business in creating a more inclusive way of working and influence the recruitment process to bring more women into the business as a junior member of staff?
Wow. I think that you are going to be amazing. So that's the first thing. And you have so much to teach that team, and to make sure that they listen to you and they hear, because like we were just saying before, I mean, only women could bring to that safety conversation the fact that it wasn't about helmets, it was about personal safety, right? It's not, I think Sheryl Sandberg tells that great story about how until she was pregnant, she didn't realize that the Google car park was 8 blocks away and she had to walk all the way. You have a viewpoint, and you see things differently to everyone else in your team. And it's important to that company and that team that you're in that you share those thoughts. Right? So don't hold back, share what you think, share what you feel, make sure that they know that there is a one of 12 that represents 50%. So you need to be loud. And so take it, sometimes that's going to be hard, but you're there because you are the best person for the job. So be the best person for the job and say what you think and share it, because that's the only way that you can do the right thing by that company.
Fantastic. Thank you, Georgie. And I think such a wonderful place to end our conversation today, to encourage everyone that is on the call to use the voice that you have. You know, be loud, make noise, and be heard. And the people around you, women around you, will undoubtedly support you and really gain value out of that as well, as we all have here today. So really a huge thank you to all of our panelists, all of our attendees, the network that have supported this throughout. If we didn't get to your question, apologies, we are going to download them afterwards. But if you do have any burning questions, all of our panelists have said that they're very, very open to you reaching out to them, join their networks, get involved in some of the groups, share ideas, and hopefully see you at some of the rest of the panels through this week. All right, thanks everybody, and bye.
Thank you, Georgia.